Hello and welcome to Macros with Mythili, eating our show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. On 7th September, the Modi government completed the first 100 days of its second 5-year term. How far has it lived up to the grandiose promises made, not only in its election manifesto, but also in numerous announcements since? In this edition of Macros with Mythili, we're going to take a hard look at its performance to date. However, in keeping with the spirit of a program that goes by the name Macros with Mythili, we're going to limit that hard look to its performance in the economic sphere, ignoring politics, external affairs, defense, etc. Yes, no economy exists in a vacuum, but we'll stick to economics for now, if only to keep the discussion more focused in the 30 minutes or so that we have at our disposal. So let me welcome to the show three key observers on macroeconomy. R Gopalan, former Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Government of India; Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India, both of whom are perhaps enjoying the freedom of watching from the sidelines as the government struggles to get the economy back on track and achieve that promised 5 trillion GDP mark by 2024-25. And to ensure that we give you a complete 360 degree, we also have with us M.S. Unnikrishnan, MD and CEO Thermax, the Pune-based engineering giant who, apart from being a corporate honcho, keeps a keen eye on the macroeconomy. Let me start by asking each of you the question that I started out with. How should we judge the performance of Modi 2.0 in the first 100 days? An editorial in one of the business papers described the first 100 days as 100 days that shook the country. Politically, that might be a fair assessment given its action in Article 370 of the Constitution. But do you find that boldness a lot missing on the economic front, Gopal?
Well, Mythili, I'm not a fan of this 100-day business for a simple reason that unless there are low-hanging fruits, it is not worth saying that you are going to make big achievements in 100 days. The processes to make the economy better, or 5 trillion by 24 or 24-25, that if those activities or these steps are taken and they are in the right line, then one should look at it as a right way of going forward. But one thing which I observe, which is something which I am not able to explain, is that there seems to be some confusion. Is there any coherence in decision making at this point in time? I'm not very sure. I'll give you two examples. One is which is relating to your electric vehicles, different people speaking in different issues. Then the sovereign bond which came up, and then they really are going back on that. So I get the feeling that there is no focused decision making on economic issues at this point in time. I may be wrong. I wish I am wrong. I wish I were wrong. But that is one inescapable conclusion. Okay. I cannot avoid making.
Okay. Arvind, Gopal says not so much boldness as lack of focus. So let me ask you the same question. Do you find government much too timid on the economic front? Do you see its reluctance to perhaps relax a fiscal deficit target, for instance, a sign of this timidness, Arvind?
No, I don't think I agree with that specific point about the fiscal deficit. But I think the way I look at it, look at the post-election scenario, economic scenario, is really that kind of dark clouds have gathered on the economy, in the sense that some of these things, given that the GDP numbers came out during this period, private individuals like Mr. Unni, who you have on your program, will tell you more about what the storm had been gathering before that. What I would say is that looking for the silver lining, I basically see a couple of things here. So clouds are clear, it's obvious from the GDP data. So what's the silver lining? There are two things. Finally, after an interim of between 2 and 3 years, they are beginning to listen to people. Secondly, I would say that some little, I'm not fully confident of this, but some little signs that they are beginning to address the issues which are affecting people.
Unnikrishnan, Arvind spoke about the numbers, but he saw some silver lining also. But if you judge by the outcome in terms of GDP numbers, etc., the outcome is certainly not encouraging. In fact, that's putting it mildly. GDP growth of just 5%, a 25-quarter low, can hardly be described as even passable. Would you agree, Unnikrishnan? Or do you see silver linings too?
Certainly I am with you on that, Mythili. A 5% growth in the first quarter is not on the expected times by anybody. I can say that if it is around, say, closer to 6 months or be the first quarter, we are okay with that. But I would also have a big sympathy for the government for the following factors. The new government started with the banking crisis deepening, not improving any further. An NBFC crisis which is going to be costing this country a lot more. You also have the housing sector deperforming, and other than HDFC, not one housing bank left in the country which is got a cost to support that particular industry. And you also see the consumption rate coming down, which is a new. Even during the bad days for the last year, compared to the first part of the last year, consumption rate has come down. Your biggest challenge right now is the consumption coming down both in the rural sector and in the urban sector at the basis of a crisis which is a farm crisis. The money in the hand of the purchaser has come down and the demand is declining. It is a bigger challenge for the economy, and I pity Nirmala Sitharaman at this point of time. What you need at this point of time is a reversal and a recovery rather than a growth.
Okay, so Gopal, Unnikrishnan is prepared to give the government some sympathy, and I agree with you. How fair is it really to judge a government that is voted into power and with a huge majority with a 5-year term on its performance in the first 100 days? Except that in the case of Modi 2.0, should we really see the first 100 days as a continuum of its first term, in which case one looks at the 100 days a little differently, Gopal?
Well, I mean, this is a hype was created by the government of the 100 days achievement. So, what would one say if they say that, I mean, 100 days is something we are going to do? I guess that, I mean, they are going to live by that promise. But as I mentioned to you, it is not a very important thing that in 100 days, you have got a 5-year mandate. In 100 days, what they do is you cannot judge the government on that. But the problems of the previous regime, I mean 5 years, are continuing into this. Now, my worry is that if people had not seen through these problems over a period of time, for instance, you had the demonetization, you had, I mean, unorganized sector, I mean, getting into disarray totally, but the organized sector did well, and the organized sector performance was, I mean, extrapolated into unorganized sector performance, and the GDP numbers were trotted out on the basis of that. Now, the kind of anecdotal evidences which were coming about the difficulties in unorganized sector were not measured, monitored or acted upon.
Okay, so I would like to ask you the same question. I agree, this 100 days is a bit of the hype created by the government and of course supported by media, I must confess. But should one really look at this 100 days as a continuum of the past, in which case this is partly the result of government's own inaction in the past? Would you agree, Arvind, or is that very harsh a judgment?
Well, the hype, there are many different questions in there. One, of course, the hype is a political issue. So, as an economist, obviously, I mean, I really don't go with that hype. The second point is, it's not a question of anything being a continuation of the others. It's the question is, I mentioned, I didn't say, you know, by definition silver lining means there's a huge dark cloud. So to understand where that cloud has come from is obviously very important. The point is not again to do a political criticism of what happened in the last 5 years, but to identify, I'm speaking as an economist, I really don't want to get into the politics. So the question is, what are the sources of this problem? And I see basically two problems here. One is something which actually started in 2011 but really accelerated in 2014. So in that sense you can attribute it to the current government, which was this excessive focus on what I call individual elements of catching tax evaders and corrupt people. This whole anti-black money thing, which I think was totally unbalanced. So the important thing now is to make the government realize that what you need to do is systemic reforms, among which the tax reforms are critical. And here is the second element of this weakness was that the GST didn't recognize it. The GST as put into place was too complex. So what it did was the opposite. You know, when you have a crusade against black money, you want to make it easier for people to operate in the white economy by systemic reforms. Unfortunately, the GST was too complicated. So in a way it did the opposite in a manner of speaking.
Okay, so Unnikrishnan, Arvind pointed to a number of mistakes by the first term of the present government. So is the corporate sector running out of patience, or is it willing to give the government a slightly longer rope? You spoke fairly sympathetically earlier. So is the corporate sector willing to give the government more rope?
Not the entire corporate sector, but some of us are personally willing, because I think if you look at any economy in the world, larger in size, whenever they came into a unification of tax structure, the GST, nowhere in the world has it happened that it continued to be doing it the same way. There had been a stagnancy or a decline in majority in the world, and it's not been expected that the GST regime in a large economy and size of India would have certainly come to this kind of a plateau. We expected all of us. I agree with Ashok on one count. With the complexity of 29-30 states, state SPs and common SP, GST put together combined, we should have simplified it, and we should have had a better system to do the filing. But one thing I will not agree with anybody is in terms of gross taxable collection hasn't come down in the country post the introduction of GST. We peaked at 1.1 lakh crore in a particular month. It is still hovering around a lakh. You've never seen this kind of an income purchase to collection, including CST and the state SPs put together. Now, what we need to do is that there are a lot of people who are trying to circumvent the GST at this point of time, especially the very small scale and medium scale. Ambit has got to increase, and we are going to, I agree, incentivize people to come rather than punish them. And we should target at 1.25 lakhs in the next 6 to 8 month period of time. Then things will be smooth and we'll start reversing that. That's the point number one. Second is, we are only looking internal. We could look little more global in nature. The global decline, it's not that only India is coming down in economic growth. Every country conceived in the world, barring maybe one or two small economies, are under strain right now, one of the various factors. When you talk about macro, let's elevate ourselves as a part of the global economy, then hitting us every time.
True, absolutely. One can't look at India in a vacuum, but the problem is that we are a poor democracy, and that makes life much, much more difficult. But I'm afraid it's time for us now to slip into a very short break, but please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we are trying to make an assessment of the first 100 days of the Modi government in its second term. Gopal, there's no doubt that if you look at outcomes, the economic performance of Modi 2.0 leaves much to be desired. But many of the things that the NDA did in its first term, demonetization, GST, the insolvency and bankruptcy code, the new monetary policy framework, push to digital payments, etc., and has persevered with it in its second term, will not really yield results in the short run. So should we credit the government for trying, or is that just not good enough in a poor country that is also a democracy, which means that people are not going to be willing to wait? Gopal.
Well, Mythili, I wanted to make a point which from earlier thing that I was only pointing out certain issues in the economic administration. I was not referring to any political administration. Let me make that really clear. At the same time, the kind of steps they have taken on the structural reforms like the GST and those kind of things, your monetary policy committee, and those are all really, things which were never done in the past, and therefore I think this government has the courage to take such steps. The question I have is that, is the government, the economic administrators are fully aware of what are the various issues which form the mosaic of economic reforms agenda, and are they able to take those individual steps with the same force and passion as they are showing on a few other things? That's my only this thing. I mentioned the coordination of various issues. That's the point I'm really coming down to again and again. Now, if that is done with the kind of political mandate this government has, this government can do really great things. There are issues, once again, now there are storms gathering which are still there. The NBFC issue is still not yet resolved, and you've got the MSME issues still not yet resolved in a big way. So, and agriculture is another issue which has not yet been resolved. So my view is that this government has the ability, it has to put its act together and start delivering, which they can do, and they have the instruments. Okay, fisc is a problem at this point in time, but with the capital expenditure they are planning, was 3.4 lakh crores for capital expenditure and 5.4 lakh crores on the extra budget resources. That's not a very big amount, but still with that, can they front load the expenditure? Can they get into PMGSY kind of issues, roads and rural housing? If they can kickstart the public expenditure side, obviously there is bound to be results flowing in the economy. One big point which I have been always mentioning, and you know about it, is that this is a very important point. Why the corporates, which about as Ms. Nitin Desai says, about 8 lakh crores available with them, why are they not investing? That is a big issue. What all should be done to make them invest, when you especially say that the capacity utilization about 75-76% in the economy? What all steps that are required to be taken to make them invest? That's the biggest thing which this government has to really focus upon, and if they find an answer to it and start implementing it, I think bulk of the problems get resolved.
Okay, so let me toss that question to you. Do you have any answers? Because the government has been trying at the legislative level in the second term as well as the first term. So why are corporates still fighting shy, Arvind?
Well, you are taking a specific issue from another person. Let me tell you what my issues are. That he has already answered you. So, there is a three-step process. We are talking about government and what it can do, what it's not doing, what it is doing. So, there is really a three-step process. One is to hear and listen to people who are facing problems. I mentioned to you that there was a gap of 2-3 years when they stopped doing it, but they seem to be doing that now. The second step is to analyze the problem and work out solution, and third is to actually implement them. Now, what I am seeing now is that they are beginning to do the micro stuff, which is the example I was going to give you, that among the 20 or 40 steps which the finance minister announced, and what she is saying she is going to come with another series. There were 3 examples which I want to mention to you. One was on automobiles. The problem was that registration costs were going up. She looked at that and realized this is a problem and said this will be delayed for a year. So that is one example. The second example was that the surcharge clearly affected FPIs, which they had not accounted for earlier, but once they understood that problem, they said, okay, that surcharge will not apply to capital gains. So very specific micro things. And the third one is a problem which everybody points out, I'm sure you have too, that the payments were not being received by people, including MSMEs, etc. So they announced that they'll accelerate the payments, which will give you a boost. You said, what about giving a boost to the demand side of the economy? So those are specific micro steps which are being taken. But what I am talking about is that at some point the government has to turn its attention to bigger macro issues, among which investment is included, of course. And so there is what I was focusing on, and they are basically monetary and tax reform issues. I won't mention the monetary, but among the monetary, again, the issue of NBFCs, which I think both your other participants have mentioned, is clearly an important one. So there are monetary policy issues, there are fiscal issues, and the question was whether they have understood the problem enough to address those issues. That I am not sure yet.
Okay, so Unnikrishnan, let me ask you to help us solve the mystery. What is holding private corporate investment back, and will the measures announced by the finance minister recently help overcome that kind of inhibition from the corporate sector? Unnikrishnan?
Corporate sector doesn't increase the investment of capacity creation based on announcement. We have the pulse on the ground. It is translated into orders coming in, money coming in, cash flows to the market, and also demand projection. So nothing is projecting towards an immediate recovery. That's the first answer. But I want to give a very detailed answer to Mr. Gopal's question. See, in the peak of gross capital formation in the country, we were almost at around, say, 35-36%, and it's come down to 27%. So that is the delta that we are talking about in terms of investment direction in the country. So the gross capital comprises of 3 factors: the government investment, the private investment, and third household investment. So the government investment was totaling always at maybe even the peak also between 10 to 11. Private investment was between a 5.5 to 7.2%. It has never gone down beyond. Whereas the household investment, which peaked at 15.8%, has come down to almost 9.5% in the last quarter. So the real investment reduction in the country is the gross capital formation later household, which means the consumption is coming down on durables, automobiles, house construction. These are the areas which are hitting. So we need to ensure that money in the hand of the investor as a household has to go up, which means rural income has to go up. People to ensure salaried employees have more money to buy things, they have money to pay back the EMI. There is no way you can push the industry beyond the level. But one more correction for that is, of the 7 or 8 lakh crores available on the balance sheet of the companies in India, a predominant part of them are remaining with the ITS and service industry. They cannot create capacity. Capacity can only be created by manufacturing industry. Manufacturing industry, the commodity side, the steel, the cement, the power, the mining, all of them are having outstanding loans and leveraged balance sheets. They do not have the ability to be creating further capacity unless the banking system is improved. So there is structural correction needed for the Indian economy right now, not words and policies.
Okay, so it really boils down to which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Does corporate investment lead to growth, or does growth compel corporates to finally start investing? But Gopal, if you look at the budget as an opportunity to do something about the economy, was it really the first opportunity for the government to do something? And did it fail to cash in on that opportunity because it was in denial about the slowdown for much too long? Gopal?
Well, I mean, if you look at the budget is very, very tight. Numbers of estimation of revenues are little suspect, and possibly RBI transfer would help to slow down, mitigate some of those, numbers, optimistic assessments on the numbers. I don't think the government has enough leeway in the budget to really, do a fiscal, as they did in 2008-9. So the best thing that can happen is, how do they front load the expenditure? How do they take up the capex in right earnest, and how are they able to ensure that the expenditure yields the desired outcome? And my guess is that this is an area where government should focus today, and that's the only thing they can do. I don't think they can do anything else beyond at this point in time, given the fiscal situation. I'm not at this thing of like Arvind is. I'm not one who going to look at 3.3, 3.4 is a gospel. But I look at what is the debt to GDP. That is very important for me. And in that sense, that is not showing enthusiastic numbers at this point in time. So in that sense, you don't have much leeway. You will only be upsetting the private corporates who would not be in a position to access the market, because you will crowd them out. So that is my only worry about it. So with the amount available, will the government front load expenditure and ensure that expenditure takes place with all the efficiencies which are required to be carried out? That's an important administrative challenge. I think the government can still do it.
Okay, Gopal feels the government can do it even though they don't have much fiscal room. But Arvind, I'm a little intrigued by the fact that in the packages announced so far by the FM, there's no mention really of the rural sector. Even though in the run-up to the election, the general belief was that it was the rural sector that was hurting, and government was very careful to try and reach out to them. So why are the packages silent on the rural economy?
So my analysis of the agriculture is that we've reached a complete dead end on the wheat, sugar, rice economy, and unless you have, and also the policies which have been supporting it. So anything you do to tinker with the wheat, rice economy is worse than useless. So unless you are willing to make fundamental reforms in the agricultural sector, it is really, the problem will not be addressed. I have been saying it for 3 years. I have said it every time the protection to sugar was given. I said this will not solve the problem. What we have is prices falling last year in this wheat, sugar, rice economy. By protecting, by increasing tariffs, by giving them subsidies, by raising MSP, you will not solve anything. You make it worse. So again, the issue is to the problems, the information there is available, but if the analysis is not correct, you will not get a solution. You will keep repeating the problems. Just one small word on the deficit. The target, FRBM target is framed in terms of the debt GDP ratio. 40% for the central government, 20% for the states. So what I favor is that we stick to the glide path. But the critical thing at the time of declining GDP, like we have now, is the quality of the expenditure within that. And I have repeatedly said that what you want to do is that you want to take risks on the tax reform, because the whole point of a tax reform is to increase the voluntary compliance, and therefore that takes time. So if you do tax reform now and you get an increase in the fiscal deficit, I have no problem with that. In fact, I will justify it publicly, because you get a double whammy at this point. You get an increase in demand and you get a structural reform which will give you higher consumption and investment in the future.
Okay, so Unnikrishnan, we're running out of time. So one quick last question to you. What would you like the FM to announce in the third of her packages that she's scheduled to announce shortly? Very quickly.
So I'm expecting that the government should be having an expense increase done in infrastructure, and that should be done, not announcement. Start spending money for the road and recapitalize the bank as it is possible, and ensure that there is money, liquidity available for lending to MSME, and relax a little more. So maybe there could be an NPA rise temporarily, but you may have to ensure that there is money available in the system. Don't drive it.
Okay, so a lot of sound advice coming from our three experts to the government to improve on its economic run rate. Thank you so much, Arvind, Gopal and Mr. Unnikrishnan, for joining me in discussion. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at TT Now.